You're listening to Veeam Partner Perspectives with Eric Doherty.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening in. Today, we're going to talk about quite possibly the most popular topic in technology. It's on the news regularly. It's in pop culture. We're seeing the impacts in every vertical out there, with government, healthcare, and education seeming to be popular targets, but far from being the only ones. Of course, I'm talking about ransomware. More specifically, today we're going to talk about cyber insurance and its place in the world of ransomware and cyber attacks. Joining me today is Gil Vega, Veeam's Chief Information Security Officer, a longtime security industry veteran with decades of experience in both public and private sector. Gil, thanks for being on the podcast. Can you share a little more about your background?
I sure can, Eric, and thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. You talk a lot about my experience, but that experience comes with a lot of scar tissue, managing through multiple complex cyber incidents in both government and the private industry. My background traces to DC, where I was a federal executive. I was the first CISO at Immigration and Customs Enforcement when Homeland Security stood up. I've moved around a little bit into DoD, Intel Space, Department of Energy, Nuclear Weapons Complex, and spent about 15 years managing complex cyber counter-espionage and technology programs in DC. And in 2013, I left that wonderful world of government behind and went into financial services, where for 6 years I was a CISO at a pretty significant, systemically important financial market utility. And I've been at Veeam now for about a year and a half. My first go around at a software company, and I love being here.
Well, we're glad to have you. It's definitely added a welcome element to how we approach our business. As you know, at this point, I think we are all beginning to understand that everything has to do with security. So it doesn't matter what your company is, what your industry is, security should be first and foremost. So I'm going to start you with a simple question here. So when we talk about cyber insurance, who should have it and why should they have it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me go back to
simple question, hard answer.
Let me go back to something you just said about cybersecurity being top of mind for most companies, and I'm sorry to say that it's not. It should be, and coming from a significantly large, huge market cap public company, I can tell you that for companies operating in that space, cybersecurity has become the number one operational risk that they're trying to manage through. But obviously, one size doesn't fit all. And I think what you're seeing in the news is a lot of effects for companies in the cyberspace that are private companies, that are small companies, that don't have a lot of resources to manage this problem. And unfortunately, I think our adversaries in an ever-changing threat landscape for cyber are really targeting those smaller companies, because they understand that perhaps security isn't the first thing everyone wakes up and thinks about in the morning. So I think that's an important point to make. In terms of who should have cyber insurance, let me just say that cyber insurance today is a nightmare of complexity. 15 years ago, I think people thought that this industry would grow up to a point of maturity that it would make it easy for program managers, for CEOs, for boards to answer that very question you asked me. I think it's gotten a lot more difficult, and the complexity ranges from types of coverage to understanding in a quantifiable way what your internal risk is and how that's associated with cyber risk. Deconflicting existing liability and general coverage policies in a cyber world can just be mind-numbing. And the insurance companies, quite frankly, haven't made this much easier. In fact, they're making it harder for companies to decide whether or not they want to cover themselves, whether or not they want to share the risk of cyber with an insurance company, or whether or not they should just self-insure. So it's a minefield, and I don't envy anyone who's going through this for the first time. I've been through underwriting many, many times. It's almost akin to sitting on a grand jury and swearing an oath and being questioned by 30 global underwriters about your program. But it's not an easy process. I think there's going to be pain associated with that first round of underwriting, and it's going to take a significant understanding not only of your own internal cyber risk that you're trying to manage in a quantifiable way, but an understanding of how insurance in the broad scheme of the overall insurance market, how cyber insurance works in that context.
Yeah. So would you say that based on all this, it sounds like what you're saying is that while the perception seems to be, or the phrase you always hear when you see these big attacks is, well, insurance is going to pay it. It sounds like, number one, the world is woefully underinsured for this, and two, the insurance companies are getting smarter faster than their customers are as to what and how they'll insure.
Absolutely, and 2021, cybercrime I think is predicted to top 6 trillion. Right? That's trillion with a T, which means that if that was an economy, that would be the third largest economy on the globe.
Wow.
And that's expected to rise, by 2025 to a figure I think that right now is estimated to be 11 trillion. So it's essentially going to double in the next 5 or so years. So the threat is only getting more and more real to companies and governments that are trying to manage this risk. And look, insurance companies are out there to make money. They're growing much more skeptical about their ability to handle this glide path of cyber risk. It's if you look at the statistics, and I just looked them up this morning because I had to renew my understanding of where the industry is on this specific point. But most insurance companies that are writing cyber policies are in a break-even proposition. They're here to make money, but they're breaking even on cyber insurance.
Oh, wow.
Because of all of the breaches, because of all of the ransomware attacks and those kinds of things. And they're trying to manage it by raising premiums. Rates are increasing in some cases between 50 and 100%. While retentions, or the deductible, if you will, that companies are going to pay are also rising. So if you've got a cyber policy and you've got a $6 million retention, insurance company is not going to pay you a dime until you've reached that retention limit, and those retention limits are only they're continuing to rise. So if you think about the fact that these companies are in it to make money, they're not making a lot of money. They're being much more prescriptive in terms of the types of controls that companies need to have in place before a policy will be underwritten. You can understand how that's just added to the complexity of the insurance market.
So it's getting more like, if you can't meet the criteria, we're not going to insure you. Whereas, I always think, because my limited experience with insurance is, around my home. If I'm in 4 accidents this year, my insurance company is going to drop me, but I'll probably find somebody out there that will do it at the most ridiculous premiums out there. If I really have to have it. And I guess, number one, is that what's happening? Or are you just seeing people just say, if you can't meet this criteria, nobody's going to insure? You're basically uninsurable.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing that happen exactly as you described, right? If insurance companies can't establish through the underwriting process that you haven't taken a due diligence approach to cybersecurity, chances are they're not even going to offer you a policy, right? From their perspective, they can't recoup the cost of a potential claim by doubling, tripling, or quadrupling your premiums, right? If you're in such bad shape that an insurance company won't offer you a policy, then certainly they're not just going to willingly charge you more for it, because they know what's going to happen, right? And it's the way today's CISOs manage. It's a philosophical standpoint that I've had for some time, having worked in government and seen sophisticated nation-state sponsored attacks since the early 2000s. It's not a question of if a company is going to be breached. It's a question of when. And insurance companies certainly understand that. And we've seen where we've had significantly sized, significantly resourced companies around the globe become victim to ransomware attacks, right? And these companies thought that they were managing sophisticated, well-resourced, well-funded, well-led cybersecurity programs, only to still be breached, right? So that's really where all these companies are headed. We've got to understand that um, we've got to maintain a healthy dose of skepticism about our own cybersecurity capabilities. And what I'm saying is, what I'm not saying is we're just going to lay down and let these things happen. Obviously,
Right.
our focus from a cybersecurity perspective needs to be on resilience and recovery. So the ability to quickly establish um, services in the face of a cyber attack have become increasingly important over the last 10 years because of the almost fatalistic inevitability of breaches in today's cyber threat environment.
Yeah, and that's how I approach it when I talk with partners and customers. Is it's not an if, it's a when. Use the assume breach model, and but like you said, don't give up. Do everything you can. Know that at least you're doing everything you can. At least you can rest from that component of it. There's always going to be that little bit of you that can't rest at night because somebody's going to get it someday, and you're sitting there trying to figure out how. Which is the best thing you can do is sit there figuring out how somebody else is going to get in, so that they don't get in. Here's a question for you. When a company is attacked, what are the odds that they're breached again with like a ransomware attack? Because I always feel like when you start to see these things on the news, I'm like, oh, well, okay, there's, wait, how long till number two? Because I feel like once everybody in the public knows that they're vulnerable, how quickly are they fixing these vulnerabilities? Are people out there, it's like, okay, they've already proven they're weak once. How strong have they gotten in the last 45 days? And do they get attacked a second time? Do you know any statistics on that, or have you heard anything, or am I just thinking anecdotally here?
I think the answer I want to give you is that ransomware attacks have been industrialized. So the gangs that are running these attacks,
Mm-hmm.
Our government unfortunately hasn't been able to impose real risks on the people running these attacks, these groups running these attacks, because
Mm-hmm.
largely they're Eastern European. They're inside the former Soviet Union, Moldova, Ukraine, Russia itself, China, and some countries where there isn't a whole lot of prosecutorial cooperation or extradition to the United States. So there's very little risk imposed on the gangs that are attacking our companies. And there used to be an idea in U.S. government when I was there. I was part of the White House Interagency Cyber Policy Group back in 2011. That during the Obama administration, there was a clear red line that if these groups attack U.S. critical infrastructure, that the U.S. response to that could potentially be kinetic, right? We could be firing Tomahawk missiles if it was such an impact as to, endanger life in this country.
Yeah.
Well, what you're seeing now is a wholesale onslaught against U.S. critical infrastructure, Colonial Pipeline, U.S. government agencies, the financial sector, and it's almost with impunity that this is happening. I think unless and until we're able to impose risk on this lucrative trade, this problem is only going to get worse. I use the word industrialized because they've industrialized it to the point that they're creating ransomware as a service. They're selling it on the dark web.
Yes.
I've
seen that.
The more cynical of us truly understand that cyber insurance companies are being breached for their list of covered and insured entities, right? So it acts as a roadmap for some of these groups to go and attack companies that they know have cyber insurance, that they know have ransom negotiation services, and that they know will pay
guaranteed payouts, right?
Guaranteed payouts.
Yeah, that's amazing, and that's an aspect I hadn't even thought of. Is the people that think they're the most protected could end up being the most vulnerable because of their protections.
Well, I think I used the word a nightmare of complexity. You're starting to get a picture of what that is.
Yes, yeah, that's a lot to wrap your heads around, and I can see why. things have changed. It's not walking up to your insurance agent saying, "I'd like one cyber insurance, please." It's really, how do you start peeling this massive, messy onion to even get yourself to a point where you could even consider yourself ready for it? And I guess then there's the other side of it too. Um, Once you've done all of that, and invested all that in doing all those repairs, is it always worth even just getting the insurance then? Because you've already done so much work. Where's that risk line fall when you're middle-sized company? Maybe not the big companies out there, not your Fortune 500s, but just little regional company that invests a lot of money in security to do all the things that the insurance companies and everybody wants them to do, but then go, you know what? After all this, is it worth paying for the insurance still?
That's a great point, and I have to apologize, Eric, because I've been pretty negative about cyber insurance, and I don't want anyone listening to
It's
this.
okay. I'm not an insurance agent, so I don't take it personally.
I don't want anyone to think that I've ruled out cyber insurance. We have cyber insurance here at Veeam, right? We've
Sure.
gone through that process, and it's an important process, and it's important for for key stakeholders, for shareholders. It's often important for regulatory bodies to have a cyber insurance policy. So there's lots of reasons to have it. I think for the small and medium-sized business, there's an added component of value add related to cyber insurance policies. Big companies like Veeam, companies I came from, even the U.S. government, prepare for worst case scenarios, right? We run war games. Sometimes these are quarterly. We have ransom negotiation processes already set up. We've got playbooks, ad nauseum on different scenarios related to potential cyber attacks. We've got break glass capabilities to augment our cybersecurity services with third-party vendors. All we have to do is pick up the phone 24 hours a day. We can have more boots on the ground to help us manage through these. I think that's a luxury that larger companies who have invested millions in cybersecurity, internal cybersecurity programs have. Medium or small sized businesses don't. And I think this is one of the value propositions that cyber insurance really offers. Everything I just mentioned can be covered under a cybersecurity policy. So if you don't have break glass augmented incident response capabilities that you've led a contract for and are prepared to leverage, cyber insurance can cover that. If you don't have public relations teams standing by with holding statements to be released in the event you're breached, cyber security insurance can cover that. If you don't have legal representation via outside counsel specializing in breach response, like many big companies have, cyber insurance can cover that. So there's a lot of really valuable services that are offered up in a cyber insurance policy for those companies that aren't able to resource this area, as well as large companies. So I think, from a value perspective, that's where I see personally the value for companies that are engaged in obtaining an underwritten cyber insurance policy.
That's interesting. And that, again, because I'm not from that world, I don't think of those sorts of things. That's a whole level of services that, take that small, middle-sized company and allow it to act like one of the big players should they need to, instead of just being stranded out there. That's a great aspect. Are there regulatory requirements right now for cyber insurance, or are there certain industries that are required to have some sort of an insurance, or is it more about the processes and procedures, and the insurance would just kind of be like at your discretion, but regulatory bodies say you need to at least be doing this much?
Yeah, I think you're right there. The regulatory bodies, and I have experience with regulatory bodies in Europe, Asia, and the United States, having come from financial services that operated in global jurisdictions. The regulators want to understand how your overall risk management program is operating. And there's not a hard requirement that I'm aware of that requires regulated entities to engage in the underwriting process and bind a policy. But what our examiners in the past have wanted to understand is how we arrived at decisions pertaining to how we're going to insure ourselves versus how how we're going to self-insure. So a deep understanding of the way a company manages risks, particularly in cyber, is much more interesting to global regulators, especially U.S. regulators, than sort of this binary decision of whether or not you've decided to, buy into cyber policy or not.
Okay. So it's, you've done all the work, see if it's feasible to make the next step kind of thing.
Yeah,
To boil it down to way too simple terms.
I mean, if I'm a regulatory examiner and I walk into a highly regulated company and I ask the question, hey, have you guys considered cybersecurity insurance? And the answer is no. That's gonna be a red flag for me. Right?
Flags and flares everywhere. Yeah.
If you haven't considered cyber insurance, then clearly your risk management process isn't probably fulsome enough to satisfy any regulator globally.
Very, very good point. And that brings me to what a lot of our partners, the ones that I've been speaking to lately, are starting to get into. I'm hearing it more, and that's really the auditing, preparation, and mitigation for companies that want to get insured. And it's a newer process, and it's not really like there's one standard list of things. I'm guessing that every underwriting group has their own list of requirements that are similar but not same. But if I were a partner and wanted to start doing this more as a practice, what kind of recommendations would you have?
Yeah, I think I've outed myself philosophically in the 20 minutes we've been talking. So the answer is going to be pretty obvious, I think, and that is focus on cyber resiliency. Right, focus on companies building capabilities to withstand and recover from an existential cyber attack. Now, our partners, I think, are in a really interesting position because Veeam is not a cybersecurity company, and I like to joke that it's not a cybersecurity company yet. I'm in cybersecurity, obviously, but our products really complement a strategic cybersecurity program implementation, right? If you think about a cyber breach, for the most part, it's all about the data. It's all about securing the data, protecting the data, restoring the data in the event of an outage. Now, ransomware attacks are much more pernicious in that, only half of the intended target is to encrypt your data and hold it ransom. The other half is to steal that data and blackmail you with its release. So that's an area where I think there are solutions that still need to be obviously identified. But from a resiliency and restoration perspective, my experience with the Veeam product suite is that our products are better than any out there in terms of instant, reliable, immutable backup and recovery. That allows companies, and we've worked with companies, multiple companies who have been victims of ransomware attacks that have been able to restore their data seamlessly and quickly. So I think Veeam partners are probably have a leg up on other situations where restoring that data isn't as fulsome, instantaneous, or capable. And I think having these companies focus on it, when I talk to CISOs of our customer companies, this is what I talk to them about. Making sure that you have a soup to nuts cybersecurity resiliency program and using the Veeam product suite to recover from anything you can imagine. And there's a deep understanding in that community that many companies just simply need to up their game when it comes to cybersecurity, right? And when I say that, I don't mean go out and spend $1 billion on your cybersecurity program. But remember, these gangs that are attacking us, Eric, they've got strategic plans. They've got headcount they've got to pay. They've got expenses. So
I saw some of our colleagues just they're putting out job applications online now. They come in code for them. And it's like, wait a minute, how can they do that? And people aren't knocking on their doors they're battering them down to arrest them.
Yeah. These are huge operations that automate their process, and if you can raise their cost of doing business, then there's a good chance they'll move on to someone who's not in the same position. It's the joke about the bear in the woods and the guy bending down and tying his sneakers, right? I
Yeah,
don't have to outrun you. I don't have to outrun the bear. I have to outrun you. It's a
exactly.
similar approach in cyber. So, just to put a finer point on that, let's not let perfect be the enemy of good enough when it comes to cyber programs. But there's a basic level of minimal effort that needs to be made in this area. And if you've got a sound internal risk management practice that can help identify your risks, I think you'll be able to invest your money wisely and focus on the things that need to be protected most.
It sounds like some of the things that even the partners could do, or especially I find that a lot of times, and in my past I've seen it, you almost end up being like their um, counselor or therapist sometimes because you get the groups in the room. It's like you're doing group therapy. It sounds like one of the best things you can do is make sure that the data center team that's doing the backups is in communication with the security teams about these sorts of things and those risk teams, whereas they may not, people kind of don't think of them all together sometimes. Because I remember one conversation I had with somebody at a security conference where I talked about Office 365 backups, and they looked at me and go, "What do you mean it's not backed up?" Like that was news, and the guy literally walked away, picking up his phone to talk back to the collaboration team back at the office. He's like, "What do you mean?" It was something he didn't think to ask because he assumed because when it was on prem it was backed up. Now it's not. By default, you have to do something. So it's really making sure all those folks are at the table and all their cards are out on that table so that they know what each group can and can't do.
Yeah, this there's sort of a natural bifurcation in most companies between IT and the folks that are responsible for backup and security. I think the gap is being bridged, and I think one way to bridge that gap is to bring these groups together, through a wargaming process, right, where you're tabletopping some scenarios, and I think you'll have lots of oh crap moments that come out of those conversations, and those are good, right? Those are
Yeah, I'd rather have them there.
It's a lot better to talk about them in an exercise than it is at 3 o'clock, on a Friday
Yeah,
morning during a long holiday weekend.
yeah, yeah. I've been there in prior years, way before all this, but I've been there and pulled the 40-hour shifts to get things working again. Unenjoyable, and now knowing what I know now, if I'd known it 20 some years ago, everything would have been very different. But people didn't know back then. So, Gil, any parting wisdom for folks as they're looking to go into, to think about not only the insurance itself, but really what it takes, what they should do, and where to get started if they feel like they're looking, at a blank page as they're talking to a customer. And the customer's like, "We need help." Where to start and get the ball rolling for this?
Yeah, yeah. From an insurance perspective on the cyber side, it all starts with education. Right? You got to make sure that you understand the issues, you're educated about the products. You've got a good broker that can explain things to you and help you make cost benefit based decisions. Right? There are a lot of a good example of why you need to educate yourself is the very nature of some of the exclusions that some of these cyber policies mandate. There's still a court case in Europe and the U.S. that involves Mondelez and Zurich Insurance. Their $100 million cyber insurance claim was denied because the insurance company attributed the attack to a nation state and then pointed to the act of war and terrorism exclusion in their insurance policy. So,
Oh, wow.
so that's still in court. I think Mondelez is expected to get $100 million claim processed relatively headache free, and the insurance company is saying no. So, paying lots of money, going through the underwriting process to book an insurance policy only to find out that the exclusions will limit your availability of filing a claim is not the way you want to do this. So having a knowledgeable broker to help you through that process, I think, is incredibly important. And frankly, my experience shows that insurance companies that are still writing these cyber insurance policies really want to understand whether or not you get it, right? Whether or not your board gets it, whether or not your CEO has put enough emphasis on this area, and they're looking for cyber hygiene. Are you engaged in a best practice-based cybersecurity policy? And if you are, chances are you'll be able to book a policy. I mean, there may be some recommendations they'll make, right? They won't let a policy unless you move to, let's say, multi-factor authentication across all of your applications, right? That's not an insurmountable additional requirement for most companies to take on if you really want to get a cyber policy. But I think insurance companies are still willing to have conversations, and if you can demonstrate that you're focused on the right things, you'll be able to get policy for sure.
You're going to have to invest in it and in them as much as they're investing in you, or else it's not going to work. And the bottom line is the money you're investing to get that policy really is investing in your own company. So why wouldn't you want to do it anyway?
Exactly right.
Yeah. Gil, I thank you for joining me for this. This has been really insightful for me, and I'm sure it will be for everyone else. A lot of interesting things that I would have never thought of because I don't do what you do. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this today.
Eric, it was my pleasure. I had a blast, and I think we should do it again. There's so much more to talk about.
Absolutely. I am all for it. So that will do it for this episode. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, where you can find our shows now.
This has been Veeam Partner Perspectives with Eric Doherty. Thank you for listening.